So these were the fields. And then we said, okay, great. So since there were many questions and promotions and inquiries about this, can we go through this swiftly? And we started with, okay, why do shadow work? And a lot of the time, the invitation to do shadow work is because it will, number one, help you alleviate suffering. And number two, it's a way to journey towards wholeness. And often it ends with number one and or with number two. But we already, in the way you have spoken here at the beginning, in the idea of doing work on behalf of the world at large, that had the invitation and the suggestion that you do your own shadow work because you include yourself as a whole person, as part of the whole, and you therefore, by illuminating the shadow in yourself, you are in some way beginning to illuminate the shadow for the whole, and thereby you ease the process of evolution. And to the degree that you choose to engage in your own development tasking with this third motivation, then you bring to it an additional power. So then I said, okay, let's cover some of the rich body of work that you can find in the world about shadow work and codify it with some personal examples. So I said what I was going to do is ground the three main shadow spaces, the three parts that we tend not to see, or the three disowned spaces, or the three suppressed or repressed spaces, whatever way you choose to name the shadow. These are all good definitions. And I said I will quickly go through them, then I will give personal example and a strategy, and that's what I did. So the first was the introjection space. That's when we absorb a distorted sense of ourselves, and broadly speaking, either by general introjection or by specific introjection. Specific to mean, let's say you work with somebody closely. It can be somebody in your professional space, it can be even you live with somebody and for many years and they view you in a certain way, and you begin to internalize and agree with their view of you. Or it can be a teacher that you work with and they see you in a particular way and you internalize that view. So that's the specific, but then you don't need to have a specific introjection. Just living in this world, being exposed to media of all sorts, and this is where the young people of today, the 16, 17 years of age, and even younger, the 12, 13, 14, too many of them are on suicide watch because they are exposed to social media and to seeing how other people live their glorious life, which is often largely a fake actuality rather than a real actuality. But they introject that as stress and anxiety producing picture, and they develop a distorted self view. So that's the first area. The second area is the projection part, when we impose or put upon other people, the world at large, our own distorted views, our own imbalances, and that content becomes then a shadow we externalize and project on others, and becomes a material inside us and in between us and other people, and often is related to those things that frustrate us or upset us or we are afraid of or make us angry. And I gave some, in a minute we'll come to a rather funny example. And the third space, which was the space of displacement and a the splitting of different parts in oneself and the distancing from the different parts of oneself. And in one simple way, you can look at yourself as the many different roles that you play in life. You may be a manager at work, and a spouse at home, and a parent to your children, and a contributor to a community, and a citizen in the global space. And you may have some other roles, and some of the ways you show up in those various roles disagree with how you show up in the other roles. And that can create shadow content, because you appear in one way in the community that you are devoted to, and then back home perhaps you're not always able to exercise and practice the very thing you describe that you want to be, and or the way you show up in other spaces. So right there in that split, the maybe parts of you that would be covered are covered to better handle the nature of this arising and festering tension, and or a conflict that may arise through the two natures of your soul, the electric you and the magnetic you. The electric you is the orchestrating part of your soul that takes the initiative and leads you into the next endeavors you embark on, and where all the new things you choose to do every day come through. And the magnetic you is the one that holds the value through the long wave of your life. And they don't always see each other eye to eye. They sometimes have a different view of what you're supposed to be doing. Magnetic you is exercising care and compassion and tells you, you need to slow down, friend, and take care of your health. And the electric you says, no, it's time to get busy again. It's time to get the next endeavor going. And they can run into conflict and can create a distance from the source that will power you. So we then went quickly through these examples. So in the case of the introjection, I showed an example of how through a question that I asked of my teacher one day, I said, I'd like to ask about greed, Greed. And there were 19 of us sitting in the room, and he looked at me strange, and he said, why on earth would you want to ask me about greed? And I said, well, I'd want to make sure that as I do my own development, that this is not an operative impulse in the person, in the character that I'm becoming. I'm describing a moment some 30 years ago. And he looked at me strange, and he shook his head, and he said, you people, you don't even begin to know yourselves. And he proceeded to talk, but he didn't fully elaborate, other than saying, of all the people in the room, you are the last person that ever need to be worried about that and ask me about that. And I didn't understand what that meant. And part of the way of the work there was for me to discover and decipher. And it took me a couple of years to take this searing moment and recognize that I introjected a view that was projected at me from other people who saw my passion, my dedication, my commitment to be expressed, or expressing rather, through their lens and value system. You'd only put yourself on the line in this way if you have some financial monetary agenda. And so I became worried that could it be that I'm doing something with that motivation when I never wanted that to be the first principle of why I do what I do. And it took me a few years to realize that, and not be upset or angry with the person that or the people that projected that, but actually be appreciative and thankful, because it made me realize that what you do as a leader, the greatest disservice that you can offer as a leader is distance people from themselves. And the greatest service you can offer is create the ecology in which they are able to get grounded in their nature and their essence and be liberated. So if you are doing true leadership of the new kind, you never look to build dependency on you. Rather, you are encouraging people to the greater power. And if you want to do so, you would lead them or guide them or offer the ecology in which they can lead themselves to access the greater power. All that was shadow work that was released in me because of 15 seconds of interaction with a wise teacher. And oh, by the way, the extra benefit released my relationship with money to a point where I'm flying now, as you know, in a very rarefied space, as where very few people flying, and able to do consulting at the highest level of Fortune 100 companies and get paid not just handsomely, but beyond what I ever imagined was possible. So I was able to accelerate and do 10 years, or rather do 30 years of financial development in 12 years, partly because I liberated my relationship with money, changed my relationship with money, partly enhanced by this shadow work. That's how powerful it can be. In the second example, I gave the example of relationship with technology, of how we project to technology now all our power because technology is promising to be so powerful. And I gave an example of how Sarah's iPhone, my wife's iPhone, gave us trouble, and I got frustrated because Apple's supposed to have perfect devices that have no problems with them. And to cut the long story short, I got on a service call with an Apple agent, and that call went south 2 minutes into the call, and I got frustrated, and I started using language that not only is not wise and not advisable, but is totally ineffective. And why? Because it was a disempowering and frustrated language. So I finished that service call frustrated, put the phone down, and I have this practice that when I find myself in this space, I do the re-owning technology. I cool myself immediately and I say, you cannot afford to be in this space. I put a smile on my face and called another, this time a better service agent, and we resolved the issues. I quickly am telling the story to instantiate that wherever we feel that we are deflated and lose our power, there is an opportunity to do some re-owning work. And swiftly proceeding to the reintegration. So I gave here the example of those two lives, the electric and the magnetic use, and how I have worked for the last 30 years to bring them into harmony, but still I would fall on my face and need to pick myself up. And that the way to create the reintegration is, rather than let them speak to each other with a critical, demeaning voice, let them speak to each other with an encouraging, higher calling voice, so they get to appreciate. So the electric life says, I know life is not a dress rehearsal. I know you're here to make the most of it. So you are, I'm the driver of you to maximize all the good work that you're here to do. So I'm going to drive you with great intensity. And I need you, my sister, friend, magnetic you, to understand and appreciate. That's why I'm driving so hard. And the magnetic you would say, I see you, I understand you, I know you have that efficacy and economy in mind. Do understand that I see a bigger picture. I see all your many endeavors, including those you forgot to remember from earlier life. So I see the scar tissue and the strain, and I will pull you back when it becomes too much. and I will hold you all the best of all your endeavors and remind you of those even in times where you forget. So by them hearing each other, they get to reintegrate their purpose, and I become a wholer, fuller, more liberated self because I reintegrated the parts that they disowned in each other.
Well, I so appreciate the illustration in more ways than one of how shadow work works to create wholeness, to bring forward the wholeness that is, but is not in our awareness. And when the part of me I don't see, the part of me or parts of me I don't know come into awareness, something is activated. I call it wholeness empowerment energy. For some reason, there's this additional availability of maybe life force that we can work with as a whole, but not when we are in fragmentation. And so this reintegration process resonates so deeply, and noticing where we've given power away, noticing where we've taken in something that isn't ours. These dynamics are I want to say supremely important to understand on some level as we work our way towards wholeness individually and collectively. So what you've described are stories of how you, Aviv, have experienced the process, and it gets, well, perhaps more interesting in the intersubjective space where we do this same work together and support one another and encourage one another to become whole.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.